Joining us right now is WNBA champion and co-host of the A Touch More podcast, the Sue Bird. We've got State Farm Chief Marketing Officer, Kristen Cook, EVP and Chief Customer Officer of Marriott, Peggy Rowe, and Amazon's VP Global Chief Creative Officer, Joe Shoesmith. And steering the conversation is the President of Consumer Brands at Allison, Lisa Rosenberg.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Cannes Lions Day 1, Sport Beach Day 1. I am so excited for this conversation. It is something I am personally passionate about. I have an amazing group of women with me on stage today. I know they were just introduced. Their names are behind them. But we are going to have a great conversation around women's sports. There is so much excitement around women's sports right now, from fans to media to investors and brands. Simply put, women's sports is hot. Can I get some cheers? Let's go. Women's sports is hot. There's record money pouring into leagues like the NWSL, the WNBA, both of which are expanding, which is fabulous. And female college athletes, their endorsements are often outpacing the men's side of the house. That deserves some cheers. Let's hear it. Okay. According to Deloitte, women's sports will generate revenue of nearly $1.3 billion in 2024. That's up almost 300% since 2021. So today, we're going to talk about equity in sports and unpack the role that brands can and should play in helping to drive that forward. We'll explore what's real and what's not in terms of brand investment, who's getting it right, and we'll also look at whether or not there's a bandwagon effect going on and what the implications of that are. So I hope everyone's excited. I'm going to kick things off with Sue this afternoon. Obviously, an incredibly successful WNBA career. And after that, you founded Together, along with Alex Morgan and Simone Manuel and Chloe Kim, who, by the way, is also at Sport Beach this week. So you described Together, Sue, as an unapologetic content platform where representation and equality is the norm, a place where culture, activism, lifestyle, and sports converge. And obviously, for brands to be aware of female athletes in sports, there is an element of visibility that's needed and necessary. And you've been doing a great job at Together in driving that visibility, shining a bright light. I think the Phenom series is a fabulous example there. And what I'd like to start us off with today are your impressions of how brands seem to have increasingly gravitated toward the women's side of the house in the last few years.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's exciting to see how brands are starting to get more involved in women's sports. When you think about whether it's a company like Together, or really anyone who's been covering women's sports, when you lean into the authenticity piece for women's athletes, that's where, to me, the secret sauce is. And I think when you work with a brand, and we have some amazing ones up here, they know what they're doing, right? Like, they've been marketing for forever. A lot of times, let's say 20 plus years ago, it was in the male sports space. It still is, of course. And so in some ways, they know how to do it. But then, and really, I always encourage brands just to add that knowledge, what they're learning about women's sports, and that authentic part of what makes women's athletes different, add it to the experience and knowledge they already have. And that, to me, is when you see brands do that, and I think you can, I could probably list some out right now. I think we'll do that later, though, right, if memory serves, on the script here. But when you look at brands that hit, I think it's because they've tapped into, let's say, a specific athlete, what's authentic to them. Because when you're the athlete, and I've been that athlete, whether you're in a commercial, you're on stage, you're doing an appearance, when it's something that you relate to or vibe with, it's gonna come across better. The athlete's gonna be more comfortable or more natural, and then that's how they can engage with the brand better, and then to the world.
That's great. Thank you, Sue. Just curious, anybody else have any thoughts on sort of the rise in brands joining, on the women's sports bandwagon, so to speak?
I mean, it's great to see. I think, and when we think about Amazon Prime, it exists to bring people closer to what they love, and people love women's sports. And so to have that enormous fan base enables us to really deliver a lot of different experiences for them.
And I love, Sue, what you were saying about the authenticity and the opportunity with partnerships in this space. I think when you can start with what problem could we solve together, or what opportunity can we go capture that might be different because it's a women's sport. We've been learning a lot about women's golf, and there's this huge pain point around paying for your travel when you're a female golfer because it's really expensive, right? And of course, that's a space that we can help. And so I think using these partnerships to find those opportunities to help the sport is perfect.
Super. Well, my next question, Kristen, I want to turn to you, and I want to put the brand lens on this conversation. I mean, we all know about the amazing work that State Farm has done. You're heavily invested in sports, from the work you've done with the Mahomes and Auto, Chris Paul in the NBA, NWSL, the WNBA, and more recently your relationship with Caitlin Clark. When you think about why brands get engaged with sports, obviously, there's an economic ROI. But as you make further investments in the female side of the house, so to speak, how do you think about the responsibility of State Farm, or any other brand for that matter, in terms of driving equity?
At State Farm, we often say it's a privilege and responsibility to steward this 102-year-old brand forward. And we're grounded in our core values of helping people. And we want to meet customers where they are, and we want to reflect the diversity of customers that we serve. And so one of the ways to do that is through sports. When you think about women's sports in general, we've been there all along, I like to say. For over 20 years, we've been supporting women's sports. And it initially started as, it's the right thing to do. If you're going to be a title sponsor for the NBA, then why not the WNBA? It was easy in terms of that decision. But as we've evolved, we realized that now it's a business imperative. There's business value for us in particular. When you look at the fans of women's sports in particular, they're very committed. They're digitally savvy because they have to be. They had to go find games. And at the end of the day, they're loyal in terms of that fan base. And so that's what we want as we think about modernizing our brand, as we think about digital evolution that every brand's chasing. And so women's sports in particular continues to be a big strategy for us, and it's about the ecosystem of things. It's a 360 approach that we take. I'm very proud of our talent strategy in particular. It actually, I think, started with Sue in particular in 2015. We did Born to Assist, and and we've been hitting on all cylinders along the way. So WNBA star Jewel Lloyd is a creative for us as we speak. Certainly Caitlin Clark, who's part of Team State Farm. But we also focus on women in sports. And so some of the work that we've done with Amazon in particular on Thursday Night Football, we've also elevated Carissa Thompson in terms of our creative and telling stories through her lens. And Taylor Rooks in particular is doing a lot for us, especially through the NCAA title run that we saw. We're part of leagues, as you talked about, the WNBA, Big Ten. It's all about surrounding. And I think a good example is Caitlin in particular relative to our approach. And so once we signed her, we started with Crossover at Kinnick, which is, to date, the most attended women's basketball game at the University of Iowa. And it had a community-based impact. And so, of course, State Farm's going to be there because community matters. And it mattered to Caitlin. And we followed her through her journey in particular. I'm so inspired by the Cover Greatness spot that we did that talked about her potential and passion and her execution on the court, but it also showed another side of her relative to her friends and family. That's who we are at State Farm, and it was a privilege to tell that story. And then as she was going through the record and going for the record in particular, we felt it was important to shine more of a light on it. Why aren't more people talking about it? So we worked with our great network partners, and we put a Caitlin cam on the broadcast so that you can watch along with the rest of the world, counting down to these records that she was setting. And then obviously throughout the NCAA tournament, And our relationship with the WNBA, we found ourselves front and center sponsoring the WNBA draft when her name was called, as well as these amazing rookies that are being featured today out there on the court. And so it's just an example of, if you're engaged and invested in all these places, it's a red thread you're able to pull through to tell a story, but to invest. And at the end of the day, we feel like we're just getting started because there's so much potential. And this moment has to turn into a movement that is sustainable. So it's not women's sports, it's just sports. And we want to be part of that movement.
I think that's excellent, Kristen, and State Farm has absolutely set the bar high for other brands. I'm really curious what the rest of the panelists think in terms of the responsibility of brands. Do brands have a responsibility to do it right, to help make, and I love that, it's not just women's sports, it should be sports. I think that's probably my favorite quote so far of the week. So I'm curious, Peggy, Joe, Sue, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, they absolutely do. I mean, we have a big microphone, we have a powerful voice, and we should be using that. I also think when we think about our customers, we should be looking at what they want, and what they want is women's sports. We're seeing large attendance, we're seeing a huge fan base and increasingly growing in women's sports. So even the business side of the equation, you have a massive amount of people that want to get engaged, and there is a responsibility when you're big and you have that kind of microphone to use it well.
And I think we have the opportunity as brands to really set the tone for the next generation. And as we target new and younger customers, putting male and female athletes up as role models really helps to shape what people think in the future.
I would just add that I think for a long time there was this sense of responsibility, which maybe at times felt like charity, maybe turned into a box check for some. No judgment, but box check nonetheless. And now it's just a really good business decision. People often ask me, I'm involved in 2 sports teams, NWSL with Gotham, the Seattle Storm, and the WNBA side, on the ownership side of things. And people are constantly asking me, like, why'd you do it? I'm like, because it's a great, what do you mean? I want to make money. Like, it's a good decision to get involved in women's sports. Yes, now it's a byproduct is that you're helping, you're helping create role models for young girls. You're driving business for women specifically. These are nice byproducts to a really great business decision. So it's really nice to see that shift happen.
And I think that's really important because there's a formula relative to, we're all in the attention business at the end of the day. And so you have stars across all different sports and leagues. You have rivalries happening and the physicality of the game, right? It's always been there, but it's exciting and it's frustrating and it's exhilarating. And then you have games of consequence too. And so I think all those things coming together is such a great formula for brands to kind of show up authentically and to tell those stories.
No, I think that's great. And obviously one of the challenges that women's teams have faced is visibility and being able to watch the games. And I want to shift my attention to Joe, because that is really still one of the biggest challenges women's teams face and women's sports face is exposure through access to content, media rights, and national broadcasting. Amazon is, of course, a streaming giant, and the investment that you guys have made in the NWSL, and WNBA is clearly, part of the solution. You were here last year, Sport Beach Year 1, and you made some predictions or commitments to what Amazon hoped to achieve over the course of the next 12 months. So here we are, a year later. How's it going?
Be super awkward if we hadn't done anything at this point, but we have. We've actually done a lot. As you mentioned, we have a partnership with UEFA and with the NWSL in the US. And I think what's really interesting about Amazon when it comes to this, the experiences that we can create, within our walls, we can do the partnership and sponsorship deal. We can also, when it comes to UEFA, we can create a fan store so that the fans can not just watch the game, but they can also wear the gear and participate and become and show their fandom to the rest of the world. And I think, and then also we have technology, so we can partner with AWS and create tools that can help coaching and help young players that are coming up and give them visibility. So it really is a 360 experience. And when we engage in a partnership like this, we think about all the tentacles of our organization and how we can put that together for individual athletes. Not many brands have the opportunity to do that, like with the NWSL in the US. We can broadcast, we can create a fan store, we can help build a lot of their brand as well. It's very mutually beneficial. And I think a lot of brands have the burden of finding other partners to partner with to make those experiences happen. And I think as we continue to grow these experiences, we're just really poised to do a lot for the athletes and a lot for the fans.
That's great. I'm curious, when we think about rights to games and the ability of fans to find what they're looking for, what advice do you all have for those that are struggling to find what they want to watch, or how to get fans engaged really quickly into a sport? If they don't have the opportunity to see it, then what? You want to chime in there?
I'll take that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a few ways. We have to invest media dollars in getting people the visibility of where we're broadcasting and sending people in the right direction, right? So we can't just build and expect people are going to come. So there's the marketing investment that's on top of actually creating the experiences as well. So I think that's really important. And again, when you think about documentary and storytelling, a lot of streaming brands have been doing a great job of helping people get to know the athletes. You mentioned that a lot of young female athletes are really digitally savvy because they had to be. They didn't have a platform, they didn't have the visibility, they didn't have brands investing in people to get to know them beyond their stats. And so taking an athlete, a female athlete, from a stat to a human being with a story, with all of the challenges that came with becoming that athlete, to helping people to get to know that athlete also helps grow the love of that sport. So where we can find places to tell stories in our marketing, when we can find opportunities to create those documentaries about female athletes, we're only going to benefit the sports and build the love.
I would agree with that. I think the strength of the partnerships that you have in particular is really important, and they have to understand what your business imperatives are, what you're trying to accomplish, what your KPIs are, but then also the expectation is we're going to lift this tide up and we're going to do it together. I think a good example of that is some of the work that we've done with our partners at Disney and Omaha Productions in particular. As we were entering into the WNBA season, we wanted to seize the moment around this great storytelling around these athletes. And so you have Camila Cardoza from South Carolina, you have Kiki Rice from UCLA, and then Caitlin Clark. And it was the series that really was raw, that not only featured what they did on the court, but you can see behind the scenes, like on the training table, like getting, what would you call it? Help.
Treatment.
Better. Treatment, right? I should know this. I played sports. And so just being brought into their families and how nervous their families would get watching them too, you just feel much more engagement. And so the ability to tell more of those stories in long-form content, I think to your point, is really important. But you're lifting up those athletes and you're creating a flywheel because you're also investing in them. And you can talk about equity all day long in terms of, salaries or whatnot, but brands, I think, have a big impact on that too.
I think the whole idea of storytelling around the athletes is phenomenal, and I think when you think about fandom and fandom in sports, fans are passionate about a team, but they're also passionate about individuals, and so that storytelling really does help. And I want to throw a question to Peggy. As Chief Customer Officer for Marriott International, you have to have your finger on the pulse of what your customers want at any given time, what makes them tick, what speaks to them, what are they passionate about? And so I wanted to talk a little bit about how you're addressing this need through the lens of women's sports and the kinds of experiences that you're creating in order to connect with your fans and their passions.
Well, connecting with sports figures is certainly a very big passion place that we see with customers today. But interestingly enough, in the travel space, actually 80% of travel decisions are made by women. And again, like as we look to influence the next generation and new travelers, I think one of the pivots we've made is, people are not traveling just to stay in hotels. They're actually traveling for a reason, and much of it today is around passion points, around culinary, food, music, sports. And so part of what we're doing is helping bring new customers and reward existing customers through these experiences that let you get to know an athlete better. In the space of women's sports, one of the things we did last year that has been fun is that we did a 1-point drop, which means if you have one Marriott Bonvoy point, you could come and join a session with Trinity Rodman for U.S. Soccer, and you got to play soccer with her, get your nails done, and take pictures. And the fan base that came was totally different than our normal customers. So we had kids and families and young girls and moms, and my son, who's 13, brought his friend, and it was just a real example to me of how I was able to give my son an opportunity that would shape the way he would think about athletes in the future. And so we're after more of that. We're doing work with U.S. Soccer and the NCAA as well, and again, extending these experiences to our members and new customers.
That's great. Just toss it to the rest of the panel. This whole notion of sort of passion points for customers, I mean, you guys are all doing really interesting things to bring fans into the game, so to speak. Would love your thoughts on how you can connect more with your consumers and how you drive the passion forward. So.
So this is not really from like the brand perspective, so I'll just maybe speak to you guys, although you already know what I'm about to say, so I'm really speaking to everybody else. I think what makes, and you just touched on this, Peggy, what makes female athletes so different is the idea of engagement versus reach. We'll get to the reach part for sure as things continue to grow, but maybe female athlete X doesn't have the same exact amount of followers as male athlete Y. That might be true if you go to their Instagrams or their Twitter feed, whatever it is. But the engagement, the amount that the fans for the women stay, they want to buy the products that athlete is associated with. They're going to watch their games. You already touched on the savviness of the female athlete fan. I mean, they will find a way to watch these games. So that's always, to me, the differentiator in terms of why you would want to work with women outside of just the passion of it. Again, it comes back to the smart decision-making around it, smart business decision-making around it.
I think maybe I'll add another angle, actually, with working with athletes, particularly female athletes and brands, is, a lot of athletes have other passions also. And I have found that in talking with athletes about what do they really want to get out of a partnership, when they are done with their sport or want to move on to the next phase, there's a lot of opportunity to think about how they translate the skills that they've built into jobs, into supporting, particularly in our business, many different aspects of what we do. So that's been an exciting new discovery for me, too.
That's great. Kristen?
Maybe a little bit of a different example I'll give. Hello. Relative to last year's Women's World Cup. And so certainly, we always lean on creative and storytelling, but we wanted to do something different. And we wanted to try to be part of the solution relative to the reach. And so we actually partnered with The Athletic in particular to send journalists to the games so that there would be more reporting on the women in particular, and these were female journalists themselves. And so we were able to kind of take those experiences, put them in a docuseries, and then tell that story too. And so I think just thinking differently and experimenting, I think there's some things that we learned, there's some things that next time we would do differently, but it was just a creative, different idea to try to approach that we want to invest in that reach, and so we're going to actually invest in more journalists going to tell the story, because it's not easy getting to Australia and taking equipment and being able to kind of report back on that. And so it was a great opportunity we did through social.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, they're all great examples. I could +1 to all of them, but I think what you're also seeing is even the composition of the people sitting on the stage is what's also driving this. You're seeing different decision makers who are also fans of women's sport, who have those fans that they're diehard and passionate about themselves. And so I pull a lot from my own personal experience of being a fan to think about the kind of decisions things that I would want to see.
That's great. All right, I've got a bonus round question for all of you. When you think about brands, who's doing it right and why? Sue, I'm going to let you kick us off.
Okay, so for me personally, not the businesses I'm in or the career, none of that. I'm just like at home, I'm turning on my TV and I'm watching a game and commercials come on. For me, if you make me go, that to me, like, that's gonna resonate. If I chuckle, if I laugh, that's always gonna hit. So, and I'm not just saying this, but State Farm has done a wonderful job through the years, I think, of really delivering on the message, but also like the humor of it. I always love that part. Recently, I've been in some CarMax ads, and the last couple years, they've really done a good job. They've also added, because we did some commercials with Steph Curry, there was an element of, and he was great in terms of the self-deprecation aspect of it, where ultimately what happened was the woman in the spot got raised up a little bit, so that was like a nice little touch. And I think Nike, their taglines, they don't hit in the humor, like the funny bone way, but they hit in like a, man, that was good. Like Caitlin Clark, you break it, you own it. What? The one where she broke the record and it was like, this was never a long shot. What? And then Asia with the MVP period with an apostrophe. Like, they just have a way of hitting that's like succinct, it's to the point, and it resonates. So I guess humor and resonating is how I look at it.
Excellent.
Go ahead. Are we jumping? I put my microphone up. You know, I would say the Nike, the Caitlin Clark poster, when that happened, you break it, you own it, that like took my breath away. And similarly, there was a long copy out of Homeboard that's actually gotten a few shortlists already at Cannes for the Wallabies when they played from Ogilvy out of Australia, which was one of the most beautiful pieces of copy. If anyone hasn't read it, have a look at it. It's been shortlisted for Copy and Craft throughout the show this year. Those pieces and the words and the understanding of how the players are feeling that you really felt in that work. And I also think any brand that's spending a cent on women's sport is doing the right thing, right? So I don't think it's just one, I think it's cumulative. So there are brands that are in the benefit, they have the benefit of large budgets and bigger investments. But I think whatever you can do, there's a massive fan base there, there's an audience there. Everyone needs to kind of get behind to make this change happen.
Yeah, that's excellent, thank you.
I agree. I think the Nike work in particular, right, it hits you here. I think our partners, or our friends at Ally in particular, I think they were bold enough to make a pledge and also bold enough to be transparent with where they are relative to their pledge, relative to investment. And then I think the creativity relative to, when you think about the WNBA, there's, you know, large players, so State Farm's there and Google and others. But they decided to partner with the Aces, who are on an incredible run, and put a patch there. And I remember watching the Aces game, and Kelsey Plum, I think she was going for a layup, and then she happened to fall perfectly in the camera line, and like, patch was right there. And I was like, that is super cool. So I respect them and just everyone that's leaning in, because I don't think it's like an or, it has to be and we certainly have a responsibility to move this forward, but it's, again, rising tides lift all boats here.
Absolutely.
So I was at the F1 in Miami just about a month ago, and I thought we have a long-standing relationship with Mercedes Petronas, but what intrigued me most was watching the F1 Women's Academy, and the F1 has invested a lot in really training female drivers at a young age. But as I looked out and watched the race, Charlotte Tilbury had her own branded car as part of the Women's Academy. I thought that was really impressive, kind of really stood out in a sport that's, you know, largely focused on men.
Oh, that's great. Thank you all for sharing. And I have to agree. I mean, some of Nike's work has really been brilliant. There was a campaign last year that I believe they won a couple of awards here, where they took the Nike brand name out of the swoosh and just put home when the women's football team in London brought the cup home, something the men hadn't been able to do in many, many years. And it made me smile in a different way. It didn't make me chuckle, but it made me smile with an awful lot of pride. So I agree with what you've all had to say. I want to thank you all for your contributions and making the time to join the panel today. I think what you had to contribute brings a lot to the conversation. It's an important conversation, and I'm still stuck on what Kristen said. It's no longer going to be about women's sports. It just needs to be about sports. So I think that's the goal. Maybe when we're back here, Joe, next year, we'll have made some progress.
No pressure.
No pressure. And I also want to thank Mark Penn and the folks at Stagwell for creating this amazing platform for all of us to have these kinds of conversations. As we've talked about, women's sports are really just beginning to get the attention that they've always deserved, and we really love seeing the momentum. we have actually our own Sports Momentum Index. It's a monthly polling collab with our colleagues at the Harris Poll that's capturing data around the momentum behind women's sports. And in fact, recent polls showed that 60% of Americans are excited about the growth of women's sports, including 58% of men. And roughly half are familiar with female leagues and say they'd watch more women's sports if it were available. So Joe, no pressure again.
I should have said on the end.
No, but brands are taking note. They have a responsibility to be good stewards so that the momentum is real, it's genuine, and as Kristen said, it's long term. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.